Jr. titled Know Him and Make Him Known. My main scripture references are going to be Galatians 1:10, 1 Corinthians 10:13, and Matthew 6:33. If I asked you when the last time you had your priorities all jumbled up was, I'm guessing it wouldn't be too long ago, because that's definitely something that our society struggles with today. According to Lifeway research, about 51% of teens in the US claim to be Christian, but only about 8% even demonstrate the lifestyle or the habits of a committed Christian. And only about half of Christian teens even took upon the responsibility of sharing their faith. Shocking, right? Well, I once heard the quote, Jesus is the bread of life. If you're starving, maybe it's because you're only eating once a week. And I realized how true that is. Thinking about it, I realized the huge difference that spending time in the Word makes. In my mindset, my thoughts, my words, and even my decisions. Priorities were something that I struggled with, but it was only until I began centering my priorities around God and spending time in Him and in His Word daily that I began to see that difference. The world we live in today makes it so easy to become accustomed to putting our fleshly desires before our spiritual needs and get caught up in this world. Even if it's in social media, seeing everyone enjoying their picture-perfect lives, when we're still struggling to feel like we belong, and on top of that, we have to stuff God in our life somehow? Is this really it, or does God call us beyond the compromised nature of this world? I love how Galatians 1:10 puts it. It says, am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant for Christ. What I want you to see in this verse is that our purpose here isn't solely based on what mere human beings think of us. Now, God isn't saying that we should completely disregard everyone and everything else in our life and only focus on Him. But rather, when we put the pursuit of worldly acknowledgement first and try to conform ourselves as a Christian to fit society's standards, it just doesn't yield the calling that God has on our lives. After all, you can't give the same importance you give to your social image, the same importance you give to your relationship with your Creator. But you may be thinking, Abigail, so how does God relate to all this, and what's His calling for us? Well, Matthew 6:33 answers just that question. It says, but first seek His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. This shows us what God really aspires for our lives as believers to look like, focusing on keeping Him first and everything else following, and not the other way around. And in reality, if He was one who created every inch of us, shouldn't it mainly be Him we're trying to please? Oftentimes, we forget about the who and the what in our lives that should really matter. When you look at it that way, your viewpoint of who you are and what you're living for should look a whole lot different. But then it's our turn to run the race. God created us to be His witnesses and to be willing to share about Him to others around us. Because it's the only thing that He isn't capable of doing here on earth. And even if you're not in a situation where you could share His word, you can still make it a part of your life to be an ambassador for Christ by the way you live. It's the least we can do as Jesus' followers, especially after all He did for us. The next thing you need to see is that the only way we can share the good news is through the overflow of Jesus in us. Because you can't give what you don't have. Picture this. Your best friend is struggling in math and asks you for help to tutor her. But you yourself don't fully understand the material either. What good would it be to try and teach something that you aren't even familiar with? That's why it's so crucial to be full of God in our own personal life, so that when it comes time to telling someone else who's struggling, it's like our own testimony and just pours out from the overflow in us. But that leads us to the question, how? How can we live for God and be so bold in such a carnal world? Well, living for God begins with the realization of why we are living for God. Unfortunately, many times we forget the truth that without God, we're nothing. He's the reason behind everything that we are. The one who created us, wrote our story, blesses us, takes care of us, and so much more. When you really think about it that way, why would you not want to be best friends with your awesome Creator? There's no one else that's worth living for more. And remember, you're not alone. When God sees the effort that we make to try and center Him, He'll always help us. And just like He says in 1 Corinthians 10:13, He is faithful and will not let you be tempted more than you can bear. So remember, when we give God the great importance, our life will stay on God's track. And though it might not always be the same as our track, remember, God's got us. So I challenge you to spend time every day feasting on Jesus, the bread of life, and let today be the day that your priorities become focused on knowing him and making him